Sozin considered telling Mark about the future upgrades his system would undergo, but he ultimately decided against it. There was no need. Mark would uncover the system's secrets on his own in time. After all, Sozin had already granted Mark his full blessing. With it, Mark would evolve far faster than any other superhuman. Asterisk asterisk. It was a risk. If Mark died, Sozin would be left without a champion. But Sozin had faith. If Mark survived 4 brutal years without a system, then now, with one, he'd be near impossible to kill. Well, I suppose it's time for me to leave, Sozin said, his voice calm but final. The system is yours now. Use it as you will. But I won't be able to save you again like I did during the Armageddon class incident. This time, you're truly on your own. If you jump into battles unprepared, you will die. So don't disappoint me, Mark Vanitas. You're my only champion. If you die, the other gods will laugh me into oblivion. Sozin grinned. Make sure you entertain me for the next few centuries. With that, Sozin began to fade, his form disintegrating into the air like mist until he was completely gone. Whoosh! Mark felt himself suddenly plummeting from the sky. Panic surged through him. What the hell? Sozin! He screamed as the ground rushed up to meet him. Didn't you literally say I wouldn't survive a fall like this? Furious, Mark clenched his fists midair. I'm gonna kill that bastard if I ever see him again. Asterisk asterisk fuck you, Sozin. Laughter echoed in the sky like thunder. Just before impact, Mark vanished. Elsewhere, backslash, the Calamity-class monster has buried the superhuman known as Ghost beneath a collapsed building. There's no sign of movement. We believe Ghost has perished under the devastating assault. The city fell into collective despair. The broadcast spread like wildfire, unfiltered, brutal, and horrifying. Ghost dead? Citizens across the metropolis were in shock. It wasn't unheard of for superhumans to fall in battle, but this? Witnessing it live, watching Ghost crushed so utterly, it shattered something in them. For the first time, they were truly realizing that not even their strongest were invincible. Pat sat frozen in front of his massive screen, biting his nails to the quick. His voice was hoarse from screaming Mark's name into the comms. There had been no reply, only silence. Had Mark dropped the earpiece during the fight? Or was he unconscious? Or worse, Pat was no dreamer. He faced reality with brutal honesty. And right now, reality said Mark had no chance. Ghost barely held his own against disaster-class anima, and this was a calamity-class threat. Still, hope stubbornly flickered. Come on, Mark, Pat whispered, eyes trembling. Are you really going to go out like this? It's too pathetic. Not you. Not after everything you've endured. At Nature Academy's underground bunker, silence reigned. Students sat frozen, watching the news. Many of them were fans of Ghost, and many of them looked broken. But not Francis. His teeth clenched, his fists shook, and his glare burned into the television. He's not dead, Francis snarled. Shut up. You don't know anything. Ghost wouldn't die to a stupid building. A friend reached out to calm him, but Francis slapped the hand away. Get off me. I said he's not dead. Ghost is the strongest man alive. You think something like that could kill him? No one could reason with him. Francis' rage was volcanic, and every attempt to console him just pushed him further. Eventually, his friends left him alone, worried that saying more would make things worse. Meanwhile, above ground, Errett sprinted through the darkened halls of the academy, calling out Mark's name again and again. She checked their classroom first, empty. Now, she scoured every hallway and office she could think of. Mark wouldn't leave her behind if the roles were reversed, so she wouldn't either. Boom! A tremor shook the school. Errett stumbled, barely dodging a falling chunk of ceiling. She took cover by a window, heart pounding. The shaking passed. She got back up and ran. Dune! 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 Asterisk asterisk. The tremors struck again, even stronger. She dove under a table in the staff room as the hallway rattled like it was about to collapse. From under the table, she spotted the TV on the wall. The reporter's voice cracked with panic. Backslash, what's going on? The entire district is shaking. It's like something is waking up beneath the ground. I think it's coming from where Ghost was buried. Eric's eyes widened. Was that possible? Ghost wasn't dead? Back at Ground Zero, the Calamity-class monster stomped the ruined building with seething fury. The earth below, it was moving, trembling like something ancient had stirred beneath. It roared in challenge. Did this arrogant human think that shaking the earth would help him? Nothing could stop them. Ghost would be taken. He was essential for their queen's awakening. They would not be denied. But the tremors kept growing, stronger, louder, and then, crack! From beneath the rubble, a light began to shine. They needed him. Without Mark, their queen would never awaken. And they would not be denied. Asterisk, asterisk. Screech. Boom. The Calamity-class Anima screeched and lunged forward, reaching to rip the rubble apart and retrieve Mark's limp body. But before it could touch the debris, crack! A hand shot up from beneath the collapsed building, seizing the monster's face with inhuman strength. The creature froze. Its instinct screamed. Then came the squeeze, unrelenting, monstrous. The pressure on its skull was unlike anything it had ever felt. Its limbs spasmed as Mark emerged, his face rising slowly from the dust and shadows. His eyes were demonic, burning with fury, pain, and something ancient. For the first time in its existence, the Calamity-class felt fear. Screech. Slam. Mark released its face and drove his fist into the monster's jaw with a thunderous blow, launching it across the block. The beast crashed through a nearby skyscraper, concrete and steel collapsing in its wake. Dust swirled. From the ruins, Mark Vanitas, asterisk, asterisk, ghost, asterisk, asterisk, rose. He pulled himself out of the crater he created, standing tall atop the broken structure. His chest heaved. His body bled. But he was alive, and the whole world was watching. Backslash, he's alive. Ghost is alive. Even after being buried alive under a building, he survived, and now he's standing. Backslash, wait, zoom in. Oh my God, his mask, it's gone. Ghost's face is exposed for the first time ever. The broadcast exploded with excitement and disbelief. The world had known Ghost only as a myth, a symbol, a force. But now backslash, he was just a young man, a furious, broken, unbreakable young man. Superhuman system. Name asterisk Mark Vanitas. Race asterisk human. Title asterisk he who perseveres through hell. Rank asterisk A backslash 1900/3000. Affiliation asterisk true good. Strength asterisk 750 plus 75. Stamina asterisk 600 plus 60. Agility asterisk 550 plus 55. Durability asterisk 400 plus 40. Mana asterisk 170 plus 17. Backslash warning. Stat distribution is severely imbalanced. Lacking stats must be improved for optimal growth. Backslash skill tree. Full body constitution, current. Soldier ant constitution 1/100. Enhances physical strength exponentially. Grants the user 10-fold amplification of their natural durability and force. Mana circulation, F rank backslash 11 out of 100. Boosts energy efficiency, enhances strength and stamina by plus 4%. Backslash comment from God. Ha ha ha, still weak as hell, kid. Backslash new mission alert. Crush the Calamity-class Anima without taking any further damage. The Calamity-class has already inflicted severe damage. Finish the fight flawlessly. Backslash rewards. Plus 50 stat points. Plus 50 skill points. Plus new skill tree unlocked. Backslash failure penalty. Minus 20 stat points from 2 random stats. Mark scanned the interface and clenched his fists. So they wanted to finish this without getting hit again? Absurd, but doable. His strength was restored, and his body was no longer broken. He could win this. Mark, holy hell, you're alive. But where the hell's your mask? Pat's voice rang out through the comms, panicked and confused. Mark blinked, reached up, and realized the truth. The mask was gone. Above him, a hovering drone cam captured his face in full view. There was no hiding anymore. But Mark didn't feel the shame or dread he expected. He'd worn the mask for anonymity, for peace, not fear. That peace was gone now, but strangely, he was okay with that. Let them see his face. He wasn't a shadow anymore. Suddenly, thud, thud, two figures landed beside him on the rooftop. Tilda and Lightning Rider had arrived, just in time to see the aftermath, and Mark's unmasked face. Tilda's eyes widened in disbelief. He's so young. Mark, you're just a kid. But there was no time for questions. Mark turned, gaze focused on the groaning skyscraper as the Calamity class dragged itself out, body twitching with rage. Go help the others, Mark said firmly. The disaster class monsters are pushing our front lines. They won't last much longer. Tilda's jaw dropped. What? Are you seriously planning to take this thing on alone? Lightning Rider snapped his pole open, stepping up beside Mark. Don't let one lucky punch get to your head. You're tough, but this is a Calamity class. Mark shook his head, eyes never leaving the rising monster. I'm not asking because I'm cocky. I'm asking because it's only after me. I don't know why, but it's focused on me alone. You two won't even matter in the fight. It'll ignore you, or kill you as collateral. He glanced at them. But the others? They still have a chance. You're better off helping them. Let me handle this. Lightning Rider and Tilda exchanged glances. It was madness, but the conviction in Mark's voice was unshakable. The battlefield trembled again as the Calamity class anima stood fully, its fractured exoskeleton cracking from the earlier blow. It glared at Mark with murderous intent, and Mark stepped forward, alone, unmasked, unafraid, and ready. All Mark knew was that Tilda and Lightning Rider would be able to do a lot more for the other superhumans who were struggling against the disaster classes. Mark explained this to both of them, and the two superhumans looked at each other as they saw the sense in what he said. It was true that the Calamity class was only focusing on Mark, and it completely ignored them even when it had a chance to attack. There would be a lot more to gain by them, leaving the fight to Mark, and then going to help the other superhumans to fight against the disaster classes. Lightning Rider heard all of this and accepted that it was right, but he was still against just leaving Mark here on his own. Lightning Rider was someone who always wanted to do what was right, and he knew that the right thing to do right now was to help Mark fight against this Calamity class. Lightning Rider opened his mouth to say this to Mark, but Tilda beat him to the punch as she easily agreed with what Mark said. Lightning Rider turned to her in shock, and she quickly explained her reasoning. There are too many disaster classes, and the reinforcements are already on their way. We can prevent more deaths by helping the other superhumans while Ghost holds his own against the Calamity class. Even if we stay here, then the Calamity class will only ignore us, and we will be useless. If Ghost thinks he can hold it back, then there is no need to stop him. When the reinforcements come, then they can come to finish off the fight. Both Mark and Lightning Rider understood what Tilda was saying. Tilda was not trying to put Mark in front of the Calamity class while hoping that Mark would win. She was only telling Mark to hold the Calamity class back for a few more minutes so that the reinforcements could arrive. But Mark really didn't have any intention of doing something like that. Mark was going to kill this monster before the reinforcements arrived. His status rewards depended on it. Mark didn't know if he would get the rewards if he got help from others, but he would rather not risk it. If the user is aided in completing the mission, then all rewards will be forfeited and the punishment for failure will be passed instead. Well, that answers that question. Mark had no intention of losing any of his stat points, so there was no way he would allow anyone to help him in completing this mission. Lightning Rider was still looking like he wanted to argue about the decision they just made, but after a few moments, he finally grunted as he reluctantly agreed to it. He rolled his staff around as lightning began to converge around him. Don't die, kid. This was all he said before he and Tilda dashed away from the scene in flashes of yellow and lightning blue to go and help out the other superhumans. Mark just chuckled at what Lightning Rider said. Die? Who said anything about dying? That was never even an option against a monster like this. Mark turned back to the Calamity class that finally pulled itself from the building, and Mark allowed his face to split into a sadistic grin as he spread his arms wide. Come to daddy, bitch. Screech. Kaboom. A massive shockwave erupted across the entire battlefield as the anima shot forward, and Mark just stood still as the anima drew its hand back and sent a punch straight at Mark's face. Slam! Mark brought his hand forward and braced his feet as he caught the punch in one hand. The ground under his feet cracked and splintered, but he didn't move an inch as he received the full force of the anima's hit. Mark was able to hold his own against the ant-head anima, even when he didn't have a system. He got the beating of his life, but at least he didn't die. Now that Mark had his system that granted him a strong constitution as well as the mana that was flowing through his body, his strength was boosted to a much higher point than before. It was as if Mark was a completely different person. Mark felt a manic laugh bubble out from inside his body as he pulled the anima towards Hit. Was this all I had? This was what Mark thought he would die for. Mark realized at that moment that Sozin was right. This motherfucking bastard was so weak. Bam, bam, bam. Mark held on tight to the anima's fist, and 3 massive dents appeared in the anima's armor as Mark sent 3 punches straight at its stomach. The wind around the area distorted as massive shockwaves flew out from the anima's body, and it spat out a wad of red blood in pain. Screech! Don't go dying on me just yet. Slam! Mark threw the anima into the air and performed a twist before he kicked it back into the building that they had been fighting in. Mark shot off the ground and followed it into the building to continue the fight. The anima screeched as it forced itself to stop flying. It formed claws with its 2 hands, and it slashed them across the air in Mark's direction. The slashes formed pressurized air that easily cut through the columns of the building before the wind slashed straight for Mark. Crumble. The broken columns weakened the structural integrity of the house, and before long, the entire building was coming down on them. But neither of them gave a fuck about that, as they were more focused on the fight in front of them. Mark ducked low and grabbed one of the metal pipes that had been lying around on the floor. He slid to a stop right beside the anima, and he slammed the pipe like a bat into the anima's head faster than the anima could turn. Slam! The anima was sent flying from the force of the hit, and Mark didn't let up as he followed after it and sent another hit into its stomach, pushing it out from the window and sending it plummeting to the ground. Crash! The building was still falling as the 2 monsters fought, and Mark was sure that anyone in the area would surely die from the falling building. But Mark couldn't stop to think about that, because this was more important. The anima screeched as it saw Mark burst through the window as well to continue the onslaught. It was a relentless attack, and the anima was desperately trying to understand what was going on. It felt like it was missing something big. How did this human manage to gain this much power in that short time? Was this normal? No, it is not normal. All the superhumans that I have killed have never gained this much power during a fight. There has to be something that it was missing. Ha 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 ha. A manic laughter coming from above made the anima's blood freeze. It saw Mark with his hand pulled back as he flew down towards it like a rocket. At that moment, the anima couldn't see Mark. All it saw was a demon in human skin. If that hits, then the anima knew that this would be the end of it. It had to put all of its power into one last-ditch effort to try and win this fight. It will be a battle of their strongest attacks, and the anima was going to go all out to win this no matter what. Screech. The anima diverted all of its power to its arm, and the armored plates on its arm shifted and formed a glove that covered its right fist as the muscles on its right arm began to bulge and enlarge until they were twice their normal size. The 2 titans prepared their most powerful attack, and they met right in the middle in one last showdown. Slam! K.A. boom! The effects of the hit could be felt in all directions for miles as massive wind pressure threatened to blow down houses and throw roofs off buildings. The news helicopter that had been following the action lost control, and it began to spin erratically as the driver tried his best to get it back under control. By the time they managed to get the helicopter back under control, the reporter had to struggle to get her clothes into a proper state as her shirt and skirt were almost blown off from the force of the wind. She didn't even bother trying to fix her hair because she knew that it would be impossible, and she just searched for her microphone and picked it up while waiting for the cameraman to bring the camera up again. The dust in the area began to clear up, and the reporter's eyes widened in shock as she saw Ghost standing alone on top of the broken and torn body of the headless anima. He won. He really won. Ghost won the battle. I can't believe it. I can't believe that he won. The Calamity class that threatened to destroy the city has been killed by Ghost in an awesome display of undeniable power. Have you ever seen anything like this? I'm right here, seeing it live, and I still can't believe it. Ghost really won. The reporter was shouting at the top of her lungs as her excitement threatened to drive her insane. She was so excited that she didn't even care about how she was being viewed by the rest of the world, and she grabbed her hair and pulled on it desperately, crying in joy and relief. She was so scared that they were all going to get killed by the Calamity class, so her relief was too much for her to bear, and she just began to cry like a child. All over the world, people were screaming and laughing in joy as they watched Ghost standing over the dead body of the Calamity class. Even those who weren't directly affected by the attack couldn't help but be happy about the victory. The only place that seemed to be as silent as a graveyard was Nature Academy itself. All the students and teachers of the academy were as silent as a graveyard as they saw one of their own students standing over the dead body of a monster beyond their imagination. Mark was a superhuman. That was something that they couldn't wrap their heads around. They couldn't even begin to try to accept it because it just didn't make any sense. Mark was one of the most inconspicuous people in the school, and he didn't even talk that much unless he was around Eric. The teachers all disliked him because he was always skipping class, and many of the students ignored him even when he was being harassed by Francis because they didn't want to get involved in anything regarding Francis. If they got involved, then they were sure that they would be the next victim of the harassment. To think that someone like that was a superhuman was impossible. Some of the students who had been mean to Mark in the past started to feel a bit of dread fill them as they thought about what he could have done to them if he got angry. If they had taken their harassment too far, then wouldn't he have just crushed all of them like ants? The one person that everyone expected to be the most shocked was Francis. They all knew about the feud between Francis and Mark, and they expected a big reaction from Francis. But Francis didn't react. He didn't say anything about the fight, and he didn't say anything about the reveal. Francis just silently sat and stared at the television with an empty look in his eyes. Rat-a-tat-tat-ta. The sound of a helicopter coming towards City A from the east echoed through the city. The helicopter maneuvered its way toward where some of the disaster-class monsters were fighting against the superhumans, and two figures jumped out from the helicopter while it was still in the air and landed on the ground. Boom! Did we really have to come here? I really don't like being in backwater cities like this one. A guttural voice spoke up as the smoke cleared up to reveal a man and a woman. The man was large, and his shirt was tight, showing many muscles rippling beneath it. This man was named Tyler, and he was an A ranker capable of fighting on equal grounds with weaker S ranks. His blessing was from the god of flames, allowing him to use fire to incinerate his enemies. The woman beside him was named Fiona, and she was also an A ranker on par with Tyler. She was a beautiful woman with large breasts and wide, seductive hips. Her long auburn hair framed her perfect face and made her blue eyes stand out beautifully. Her dress was cut low in the chest area, so every man in the area couldn't help but turn to look at her with lust in their eyes once they both landed. Fiona was blessed by the goddess of love herself, and even though her blessing was only a minor one, it gave her enough power to seduce anyone that she encountered. It didn't matter if it was a man or beast. She could make you fall for her with nothing but a glance. The two superhumans were from the Emergency Response Unit of the National Superhuman Alliance. The National Superhuman Alliance was a large body that encompassed all of the superhumans in the world. Every superhuman that existed and lived in America was registered under the American NSA branch without exception. But even though the Alliance had the authority to enforce the registration of superhumans, they did not have the authority to force superhumans to go and fight. Many superhumans who registered with the NSA didn't bother fighting under the NSA because they knew that they would not get as much recognition or compensation from a government body. Instead, they went to fight under a separate guild that would pay them a lot more money and give them a lot more freedom. The only time that superhumans were mandated to go and fight by the NSA was when emergencies like this arose and reinforcements were asked for. If there were no superhumans registered under the NSA nearby, then the closest superhumans must respond to the call for help, and they would be paid for fighting off the monsters that they encountered by the government. Fiona and Tyler were part of a separate guild called the Artemis Guild, and the only reason why they were even here was because they were the closest superhumans who could respond to the call for reinforcements by Tilda. Tyler looked like he would rather be doing anything else, and Fiona just glanced around with an alluring look in her eyes as her thoughts ran wild. She was already thinking about how strong the Calamity class that attacked this place must be for it to have caused this much damage in such a short time. Once these two superhumans landed, all the monsters in the area turned toward them with mad looks in their eyes as they were immediately lured in by Fiona's seduction ability. Her ability to seduce anyone was a wide-area effect skill that she would use to put the monsters under a trance and make them charge towards her. It was very effective in drawing an aggro so that Tyler could handle monsters easily. I'll leave the pitiful creatures to you. Try not to cause them too much pain since they are now under my control. They are my precious little babies after all. Fiona said this to Tyler after she noticed that all the monsters were running towards them, and she slowly backed away. When Fiona talked, she spoke in a motherly manner that would make even the strongest of men call her mummy. If not for the fact that Tyler was already used to her skill, then he would have definitely fallen for it as well. Fiona jumped away from the area just as a large flame began to surge around Tyler, and a massive storm of fire erupted around his body to signal the beginning of his attack. The monsters would not stand a chance against Tyler, and Fiona was sure that Tyler would not leave any of them alive, so she could leave this place and go toward the area where she sensed the Calamity class and Mark were. Fiona landed on top of a building and looked down on the area where Mark fought against the Calamity class, and she could only raise her hand to her mouth in shock. Oh my, this is far beyond what we expected. Did that vigilante really cause all of this? I already disregarded him, but maybe I should reevaluate his worth. It might not be so bad to have him in the Artemis Guild. Fiona began to talk to herself as she looked at Mark's handiwork, and she knew that he would not be a bad addition to her guild. There were already 2 S ranks in her guild, but from the amount of destruction here, Fiona could tell that Mark was on a different level from those S ranks. They needed strong people if they were going to stand out from all the other guilds out there. The entire area was a wreck. The buildings were destroyed, and flames were surging to life because some of the gas pipelines in the buildings were starting to burst and leak. There's going to be a very large uproar about this incident, and it would probably take months for them to properly fix the damage that it caused. And standing in the middle of the wreckage without a care in the world was the man who caused all of it. Fiona narrowed her eyes at him curiously, and she wondered what sort of person Ghost was. She could tell that he was just a teenager from how young he looked, but that was all she could tell. Well, as long as he was a teenager and a man, things would be easy for her. He is just another person that she needs to get under her control. User has successfully completed the mission, crushed the Calamity class Anima without suffering any more damage. The Calamity class Anima has dealt significant damage to the user, and the user's durability level is less than half of what it should be. Crush the Calamity class and win this fight without suffering any more damage to your body. Rewards: plus 50 stat points, plus 50 skill points. The user will gain a new skill tree. The user has gained the new evolvable skill tree. Taunting. Current taunting variation. Call of the Shadow Wolves, F rank. Taunting, F rank, 1 out of 100. This skill lures enemies with a lower rank towards the user, diverting their attention from all distractions and encouraging aggressive engagement. At the current level, the skill has a 20% chance of working on opponents 1 rank lower than the user. Comment from GOG. Be careful with this one. It could be a blessing and a curse. Mark read through the system notifications, and he agreed that this new skill tree could be both a blessing and a curse. If Mark used it properly, then he could gain more power by taking all the kills for himself. But if he didn't use it well, then he would end up biting off more than he could chew. Mark closed this tab, and another tab came up immediately after. Due to constant action, the user has unlocked a new evolvable skill tree. Blunt Force Trauma. Blunt Force Trauma, F rank, 1 out of 100. This skill heightens the probability of landing a critical hit as the user delivers consecutive successful punches to the enemy, harnessing the cumulative impact for devastating effectiveness. At the current level, the chances of landing a critical attack increase by 1% with every consecutive punch. Critical attack deals plus 100% extra damage to the enemy. Wait, I can get skills just from repeating actions. This was an amazing discovery for Mark. He didn't know that he could make a skill just by doing one thing over and over again. The possible applications for this were endless. Mark could learn how to use a weapon and practice with it over and over again until it becomes a skill. Or he could learn a martial art and repeat the actions until the system recognized it as a skill. The superhuman system can only create skills from actions that are done during battle. Actions carried out outside of battle will only improve stats and existing skill points. Mark deflated in annoyance as the system sent this message, but he didn't stay down for long as he recognized that this was still an amazing development. The possibility that Mark could make a martial art into a skill was still high, but Mark decided against trying to make a weapon-based skill. Learning how to use weapons was too tedious and time-consuming, and Mark would rather use that time to learn martial art since he loved fighting with his fists more. Mark looked at the skill that he got, and he could immediately tell that this skill was amazing just from the description that he read. The skill would allow Mark to land more dangerous punches the longer he fights against his enemy. The longer he fights, the higher the chance that he would be able to land a critical hit and the higher the chance of him winning. The skill was awesome. Superhuman System. Name, Mark Vanitas. Race, human. Title, He Who Perseveres Through Hell. Plus 10% increase to all stats. Rank, a 1900/3000. Affiliation, True Good. And use stat points, 50. And use skill points, 50. Strength, 750 plus 75 plus 70. Stamina, 600 plus 60 plus 58. Agility, 550 plus 55. Durability, 400 plus 40. Mana, 170 plus 17. System stats are greatly unbalanced, and the user is advised to improve the lacking stat to ensure proper growth. Skill tree, full body constitution. This is a unique skill tree enabling the user to systematically enhance and fortify every aspect of their physical form, elevating strength and resilience to unprecedented levels. Current full body constitution, Soldier and Constitution, 1 out of 100. Soldier and Constitution. This skill endows the user with the ability to enhance their physical strength to levels proportionate to that of a soldier ant, enabling them to withstand power that is 10 times higher than their current physical capability. Mana Circulation. Mana Circulation is a skill enabling the user to enhance the efficiency of mana distribution throughout their body, optimizing energy flow for heightened senses and greater strength. Current Mana Circulation stage, F rank, 11 out of 100. Stat improvements due to application of mana. Strength, plus 4%. Stamina, plus 4%. Taunting. This skill lures enemies with a lower rank towards the user, diverting their attention from all distractions and encouraging aggressive engagement. Current taunting variation. Call of the Night Wolves, F rank, 1 out of 100. Probability of successful taunting based on level, 20%. Blunt Force Trauma. This skill heightens the probability of landing a critical hit as the user delivers consecutive successful punches to the enemy, harnessing the cumulative impact for devastating effectiveness. Critical attacks deal plus 100% extra damage to the enemy. Current rank, F rank, 1 out of 100. Probability of landing a critical attack, plus 1% for every successful consecutive hit. Comment from Gog. I just checked, and I saw that you're still a fucking virgin. Ha ha ha. All these skills, and yet you have no bitches. Mark felt his eye twitch in annoyance as he read the message from Sozin. What the fuck does he mean by he checked? How can you check if a man is a virgin or not? Does Sozin mean that he went and watched Mark's life? Or, wait, did he go through my memories? This fucking bastard. How can you go through someone's memories looking for something as stupid as that? Mark sighed in anger as he tried his best to get Sozin out of his head, and he looked at the skill and stat points that he got from the successful completion of the mission. Mark wanted to just put everything into mana circulation and the mana stat once again, since the prompt from the system was telling him that his stats were unbalanced. But Mark thought about it, and he knew that it would be stupid. Mark already put a lot into his mana stat and the mana circulation skill before. So why not put some of the points into the full body constitution skill? Full body constitution allows Mark to multiply his overall abilities just like the mana circulation skill, and from what Mark read in the system, he could evolve the full body constitution skill and gain another skill that would make him far stronger. It was a good investment, and Mark decided that he would put 20 points into full body constitution and 15 into blunt force trauma. He would then separate the remaining skill points into taunting and mana circulation. Mark was interested in how taunting works, and he knew that it would be beneficial in the future if he wanted to rack up as many kills as possible, but he didn't need it as much as he needs mana circulation right now. So he would add 5 points into taunting and the remaining 10 points into mana circulation. Does the user wish to distribute points across the selected skills? Yes/no. Mark chose yes, and he felt his body slowly changing and growing in strength as the points were immediately sent towards the selected skills. The user has added 20 points to Soldier and Constitution. The user has added 15 points to Blunt Force Trauma. The user has added 5 points to Call of the Night Wolves. The user has added 10 points to Mana Circulation. Once Mark was finished with that, he then turned towards the stat points that he had, and he thought about how to distribute them. There were 50 stat points, the same number as the skill points, but Mark knew it would be much more difficult to distribute the stat points since he could easily make or break the balance of his strength based on what he does. The most important stat to raise right now was mana, since it was so much lower than all the other stats. But Mark was also interested in raising his durability and agility. Durability would help to make sure that Mark takes less damage from attacks, and agility would help him to dodge attacks easier. Mark didn't like how many times he got hit in the battle that just finished. Mark knew that the reason he got hit so much was mainly because he didn't have enough agility to move around like he wanted. Does the user wish to distribute points across the selected stats? Yes/no. Mark chose yes once again, and he could feel more changes occurring in his body as his stats were augmented based on what he chose. The user has added 20 points to durability. The user has added 10 points to agility. The user has added 20 points to mana. Mark finally sighed as he finished adding the arduous task of adding stat and skill points to his system. Mark could see how important these points were, and he decided that he would have to find a way to store up some points from now on so that he could add them if he was ever in a losing fight. It wasn't very efficient to start adding stat and skill points while he was on the battlefield, but you should always be prepared in case there is an emergency. Well, aren't you quite the looker? A sultry voice that immediately pierced through Mark's ears and went straight into his head came from behind him, and Mark could feel a slight fuzzy feeling in his head telling him to turn around obediently and bend down like a dog in front of whoever was standing there. Mark has to serve his new mistress and give her his everything. External stimuli detected by system. Analyzing. The system categorizes external stimuli as a potential danger to the system's survival. Countermeasures will be taken. System has blocked the external stimuli. Potential danger neutralized. Since the system lived inside of Mark's brain, and Fiona's powers worked by taking control of the cerebral cortex of the brain and making whoever she entraps into her slave. The system saw Fiona's power as a threat to itself and blocked the power for its own survival. Mark shook his head slightly and grunted in annoyance as he felt the fuzzy feeling in his head clearing up. He turned around with a scowl and glared at the person standing there. Mark could immediately tell that the woman was a superhuman from the way she carried herself. She radiated a kind, soothing power that was no less dangerous than Yellow Phantom. She had to be at least an A rank. "Who the heck are you?" Fiona was shocked once she heard Mark's tone. Fiona was someone who was very confident in her ability to seduce anyone with only a single sentence. She didn't even need to say anything sometimes. Her mere presence would make people subservient to her. So how was this teenage boy, who should be the horniest animal in the world, managing to block against her attack? "No, I'm sure that it is just a fluke. He must still be filled with adrenaline, so he's just on edge." Sometimes, when someone has too much adrenaline running through them, or their emotions are a complete mess, they won't be able to know that they are under Fiona's spell, and her blessing would lag a bit. But Fiona's blessing always worked, so she was sure that it would work if she tried a second time. Mark saw hundreds of emotions flash across Fiona's face, and he was sure that it had something to do with her blessing being blocked. Mark could tell that she was not used to people being able to counter her blessing, and she was feeling annoyed by that. Fiona cleared her throat and allowed a beautiful smile to stretch across her lips as she looked up at Mark with lidded eyes. Her cleavage seemed even more succulent, and her gown flowed perfectly with the wind, hugging her body tightly as her blessing poured out from her in waves. She sent all her seductiveness at Mark all at once. "Won't you be a little nicer to this big sister? You just met me for the first time today, didn't you? Let's be friends." Potential danger has been neutralized. Before the blessing could entrap Mark, his system came up once again and blocked all of it, making it useless. Mark blinked down at the woman with nothing but impassiveness in his gaze. He couldn't deny that she was beautiful. Her full hips and bountiful breasts were very alluring, but Mark was not affected by it at all. Mark lives with Erit, who is one of the most beautiful girls he has ever seen in his life. Big boobs were a part of his everyday life. "If you don't have anything sensible to say, then I'll be leaving. I have things to do." Once Mark said this to Fiona, he turned and was about to jump away. He wanted to go and check on Erit as quickly as possible to make sure that she was all right. Knowing Erit, Mark was sure that she would be extremely worried about him, and she would have almost run mad from the shock that she would receive from seeing him on TV as Ghost. Mark was not looking forward to that conversation. "Wait, where the heck do you think you're going? Why are you even moving?" Fiona was no longer calm. "Wait, where the hell do you think you're going? Why are you even moving?" Fiona lost her cool and suddenly shouted at Mark as she noticed that he was not under her control. This was the first time that she would ever experience something like this, so she had no idea how to react. It was too shocking. She took a deep breath once she saw Mark stop moving, and she decided that she had to use a different strategy here. It was obvious that her blessing was useless against Mark. Is it because he is of far higher rank than her? How is that possible? Fiona's blessing only failed when the person she was trying to entrap was far higher than her in rank. But even as an A rank, Fiona was still one of the strongest A ranks in the world, and she could easily trap low-level S ranks. There were only a few S ranks in the whole world who could withstand her power, and she knew them all, so she was certain that there shouldn't be anyone capable of resisting her. But yet, there was someone else who could resist her blessing. It fucking pissed her off. "We need you to come with us. There are a lot of unanswered questions, and the NSA would like to have a few words with you about what happened here." Fiona decided that she would just try to get Mark to come with them instead of trying to lure him using her ability. The NSA? Mark was confused for a moment as he heard this before he remembered that the NSA was the governing body for superhumans in America. The National Superhuman Association was like the superhuman government that was separate from the actual government. Mark has never had to deal with them before because he was always working in the shadows. As a vigilante, the NSA had no idea who Mark was, so there was no way for them to try and force him under them. But now that his face was revealed, they would do anything to get him. Mark didn't mind registering with the NSA, but he was not going to do that now. He first needed to make sure that Erit was all right, then he could go and do whatever they wanted him to do. "Sorry, Maybe you can set a different date or something. There is someone I have to look for right now, and I can't leave them alone without knowing if they are all right. Mark was about to leap away again, but Fiona's next words froze him in place. Fiona put her palm against her cheek and turned away with a small smile. It's that girl. Erit. That was her name, right? You shouldn't worry about her. She is safe. I sent a few soldiers to make sure of it. You should just come with us and we'll discuss first. Doom. Fiona's eyes widened as a massive pressure suddenly fell upon the area. She looked at Mark, and she saw that his entire body was radiating intense anger. Mark glared at Fiona and took a threatening step forward. If there is even a single hair missing on her head when I see her, talking to me will be the very least of your problems. Fiona quickly began to surge mana through her body as she anticipated a fight from Mark. She didn't know what sort of person Mark was, and she wasn't sure if he would attack her on the spot or not, but she was not going to risk it. They managed to do a quick search into Mark's life once they saw his face on TV, and they found a weakness that they could exploit to get him to cooperate with them, so he doesn't go out of control. It was the only way that they could think of to make him do what they wanted, since superhumans are always unpredictable. But Fiona realized that she should have been more careful with how she told him about them taking Erit. Fiona was not a frontline fighter, and she knew that she would not be able to withstand an attack from Mark since her blessing didn't work on him. She should have come here with Tyler. Ring, ring, ring. Fiona's comm began to ring, and Fiona grunted in annoyance as she pressed the button to answer. What is it? I'm not in the best position to talk since I'm a little busy right now. If you want to say something, then come here and tell me. Fiona tried to make things even out by bringing some reinforcement, but the person on the other end of the call didn't come with any sort of good news. Madam Fiona, there's a problem. The girl is missing from the school. Fiona blinked in shock and glanced at Mark for a moment before she took another step back and asked him to explain what the fuck they meant by she was missing from the school. Fiona only sent the men to retrieve Erit now, and she thought that she would already be in their custody since they knew exactly where Nature Academy was. But now they were saying that she wasn't there? What kind of bullshit is that? Erit is only a normal human, and the men that went to retrieve her were all E and F rank superhumans. There is no way she can run away from people like that. We searched through the bunker and the entire school, and we couldn't find any traces of the girl. But there was something else. A fight broke out in one of the classrooms. There are scratch marks and blood. Fiona could feel her heart beating faster and faster. The thing that the man was saying was making it sound like Erit was dead. There is no way. They couldn't possibly have that much bad luck. Fiona glanced at Mark once more, and she watched her words and made sure not to say anything that would make him deduce what they were talking about. Fiona knew that Erit was the most important person to Mark, and she didn't want to risk angering Mark now, since she knew that his power was almost on par with other S ranks. If an S rank goes on a rampage in anger, then there is nothing anyone can do to stop that S rank from destroying at least 3 cities. It would take another S rank to stop them, and that fight would also end badly for the regular humans since they are the ones that would be trampled on by the superhumans. After all, when 2 elephants fight, only the grass beneath their feet feels it the most. Fiona whispered into the phone. Find her. I don't care what method you use. I don't care how much time it takes. Find her now and take her into custody. If there is no body, then I am sure she is not dead. Just find her. Hey! Exclamation point. Fiona turned around sharply as she suddenly saw Mark standing right in front of her, and she had to crane her neck up to get a good look at his face. She had no idea that he was so tall. He had been standing far from her just a second ago, and she wasn't able to really measure their height difference. But now that they were standing chest to chest like this, she could tell that she was not even as tall as his shoulders. Fiona measured how fast Mark must have moved in her mind, and she decided that he was at least as fast as Tyler. Tyler needs to hurry up and finish with those disaster classes, so he can come here to help her. I'm going to search for Erit right now, and you better pray to your government that I find her. There are limits to what a person can endure from your NSA. You came here and told me that you have her in custody, and now I'm hearing that she has gone missing? Does your government really want to make an enemy of me that badly? Mark didn't give a damn if he made the entire world his enemy at this point. If he learns that something happened to Eric, then he would immediately start throwing hands. He would beat the crap out of everything and everyone in his path as he looks for her. The entire world could go to hell, but Mark was never going to allow his precious people to get into trouble because of his powers. Fiona grit her teeth inside her mouth once she heard this to prevent herself from showing any weaknesses. She was sure that Mark was going to attack her, but after a few seconds of glaring at her, Mark leaned back. This is the exact reason why Mark never wanted to tell Aerith about his power, and also why he wore a mask for so long. Superhumans are not treated in the same way that humans are treated. The government is always trying to find a way to put restrictions on superhumans, and they will try anything just to find a weakness. Mark's only weakness at this moment was Aerith, and he was not going to forgive anyone that touched her. Mark, listen to me. There's a problem. A big problem. The tracker that we placed on Aerith is going crazy. Mark's AirPod came to life, and Mark could hear Pat's frantic voice shouting over the comm. Mark put his hand up and frowned as he asked Pat what happened to Aerith's tracker. Pat placed a tracker on himself and Mark a long time ago in case there was ever a situation where one of them was kidnapped and they couldn't escape on their own. That way, they would be able to find the other person and bring help. But Mark realized that Aerith was also someone who could be kidnapped to get to him, so he told Pat to place a tracker on Aerith as well. It was morally questionable, and they knew that Aerith would be pissed if she ever found out that they did it. But Mark was overprotective of Aerith, and he was not going to let her get in danger because of her relationship with him. If she was ever in danger, Mark was going to be there to get her out of it. What's happening to the tracker? Were you able to find out where she is? Pat was already tracking Aerith once he heard what Fiona said about having her in custody. But once he traced the location of the tracker, he couldn't believe what he saw. The NSA, sure as hell, doesn't have her because she was in an unbelievable place. He was staring at an image of the tracker somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Mark, I don't think your wife is with the government at all. But that can't be right. It doesn't make sense. If the tracker is right, then she is somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and she is moving at an insane speed. Mark could only blink in surprise and frown. Did Pat just say that Aerith was in the middle of the ocean? That had to be a lie. That couldn't possibly be true. Mark turned to Fiona and spoke in a hurry. What did your men find when they went to the school? Didn't they see Aerith inside the bunker? Mark had a theory, but he didn't want to believe it, even though a small part of him was already telling him that he was right. And when Fiona placed her hand on her cheek and frowned while shaking her head, Mark knew that he was right. Aerith never went into the bunker after he left. What the heck is wrong with that stupid girl? Can't she think about her own life for once? Mark put his hand on his head and started to think deeply. There was a high chance that Aerith was attacked by a monster if she was outside of the bunker. The anima attack reached all the way to the school, so they would have sensed Aerith if she was not in the bunker. But then, if they sensed Aerith, why didn't they just kill her and keep moving? This was a question that ran through Mark's mind, and Mark had no answer for it, as he could only wonder what the monsters were trying to do. There have been strange things happening since that disaster-class monster first appeared on the shore of the city yesterday. Why was the Calamity class only aiming for Mark during this fight? There were other superhumans there, but the Calamity class completely ignored them and came for Mark alone. And now that Aerith was missing, they say that she is somewhere in the middle of the ocean. These things have to be related. Did they take Aerith because they also know that I am close to her? Mark wondered if Aerith had been taken by an anima in an effort to lure him out. But that wasn't possible. Were the anima ever capable of that much planning? Could they ever think that deeply before? They have always been creatures of destruction, and this incident is the first time that they have attacked in a group of more than two. They have never had a plan when attacking people. But Mark was sure that this couldn't be a coincidence. There was a high chance that Mark was right, and he was the reason behind all of this. Mark told Pat to try and find out where they could possibly be heading. I already did that. It seems that there is a small island a couple 100 miles away from the coast. The tracker has been moving towards this island nonstop, and there is a high chance that this is where they are going. Pat, I need to get to that island now. Can you get me there? Mark only needed to say this, and Pat immediately understood that Mark was asking for a means of transportation. Pat was not sure what was on that island, and he hated it when Mark went into an unknown situation, but there was no one who could stop Mark when Eric was involved. Mark would swim to that island if he needed to. New mission alert. Save the kidnapped Eric before she loses her life. Rewards. Plus 200 stat points. Plus 200 skill points. The user will gain 1 random S rank weapon. Failure. Minus 10 stat points from 3 random stats. Minus 10 skill points from 3 random skills. Eric will die. Mark read through the new mission from the system, and he frowned as a new surge of motivation rose from inside him. This was confirmation that Eric was definitely not dead. He still had a chance to save her before the monsters killed her. He was going to save her no matter what. Mark read through the new mission from the system, and he frowned as a new surge of motivation rose from inside him. This was confirmation that Eric was not dead. He still had a chance to save her before the monsters killed her. He was going to save her no matter what. Pat knew that Mark was already thinking of going to that island to save Arya, and he knew that this was exactly what the monsters wanted. Pat was able to make the same deduction that Mark made earlier, that this kidnapping was a plan by the Anima to lure Mark into that island for some reason. And no matter how Pat looked at it, there was no way this would end well. The Anima are meant to be mindless creatures that could never think for themselves other than when they were trying to kill humans. They already caused enough damage as mindless creatures, so Pat could only imagine how much damage they could cause if they started thinking for themselves. Pat used satellite imaging to look at the island closely, and he didn't like what he saw. It was a completely deserted island, and there were only thousands of trees forming a dense forest surrounded by beaches on every side. There was no sign of any anima, but a closer look will show hundreds of openings all over the island floor that reveal a possible colony existing within the island. Mark could be walking right into an anima hive. I don't think you should do this, Mark. That island. It's obviously a trap. I think they need you for something, and they're trying to make you come to that island by any means. Pat tried to reason with Mark, but Mark was silent on the other end of the call. He didn't say anything for almost 10 seconds, and Pat knew that there was no need to talk to Mark anymore. Mark knew that it was a trap, and he just didn't care. I could get a helicopter ready. I just bought one recently for a crash test, but I haven't gotten around to using it yet. It's currently somewhere in City C, and I can bring it over in less than a day. Mark would always be surprised when he hears things like this. He already knew that Pat was rich. Richer than anybody that Mark had ever met, but this was insane. Pat made most of his money from buying and selling cryptocurrency, and since most of his money was in different crypto tokens, no one really knew how much money Pat had. Mark also made a lot of money through Pat's crypto trading, but he had no idea how much Pat really had. Why did you buy a helicopter for a fucking crash test? No, that's not important. Can you get it here faster? Like in an hour? The sound of clicking over the phone paused, and Mark could almost hear the cogs turning in Pat's head. Pat thought about what Mark said and thought of all the possible ways to get the helicopter to him quickly, but there was nothing that he could do to get that helicopter there that quickly. 5 hours. If you can wait that long, then I can get the helicopter to you, if I push for it to be flown really quickly. I'm sorry, Mark. It's the best I can do. Mark growled deep in his throat as he heard this. He knew that it wasn't Pat's fault, but he felt angry right now. If only he had a way to fly, then he would be able to get to the island quickly. The first thing that Mark would do when he gets into another fight is jump off a fucking building so that he can trigger a flight skill. Fine, I'll be waiting. Just hurry it up. Don't know what the monsters want with me, but I know they only took her so that I can come to them. I don't want anything to happen to her because of me. Yeah, I know. Don't think too hard about it, Mark. If they wanted her dead, then they would have killed her already. I can still see that her vital signs are active, so I'm sure they won't kill her since they want to use her as bait. Pat said all this as he tried to calm Mark down, but what Pat didn't say was that Arya's vital signs were extremely weak, and it looked like she was already going into hypothermic shock from being in the water too long. Pat didn't know if Arya would survive long at this rate, but he was not going to say that to Mark since it would only make Mark more anxious to leave and save her. The best thing right now was for Mark to calm down and regain some of his energy. Did you say something about an island? Fiona spoke up suddenly, and Mark was almost shocked that she was still standing there. Mark completely forgot that she was even here in the first place. He was so worried about Aerith that her presence didn't even matter to him anymore. Slam! Two figures suddenly slammed into the ground behind Fiona, and Mark only raised his head to look at the much taller man. Fiona didn't even react at all since she already knew who they were, and she was more interested in talking to Mark right now. She wanted to know what he was talking about with the person on the phone. The two people that landed were Tyler and Tilda. Tilda looked very tired, and she was already on her last leg with many injuries on her body, but she was relieved as she looked around at the destruction that occurred during the fight with the ant-headed anima. She couldn't believe that Ghost was able to defeat a monster like that all on his own, and his image in her mind just increased by a lot. But there was still another problem, and Tilda didn't know how to feel about it. She couldn't come to terms with the fact that Ghost was so young. Even though he was tall, there was still a very youthful look on his face, and there was no denying that Ghost was still a teenager. Lightning Rider already left to go and get his wounds cleaned and bandaged, but Tilda knew that if he was here then he would be telling her that he was right all along. They should have looked deeper into Ghost's identity before allowing him to fight with them. She was grateful that he killed the Calamity class, but if she knew that he was just a child, then she would have tried harder to take him out of danger. However, Tilda also knew that her efforts would have been useless since the monster Mark fought was far above her power level. Tyler looked around the area that he was standing in with interest. He glanced down at the ant-headed anima that was just killed before looking up at Mark with a great amount of interest burning in his gaze. To think that a high school boy was responsible for all this. That was an amazing feat that Tyler had never seen before. Fight me. Tyler began to move towards Mark with a wide grin on his face, and he cracked his knuckles as a flame began to surge to life from under his feet. Tyler wasted no time as he immediately challenged Mark to a fight. Mark narrowed his eyes, and his muscles tensed as he prepared himself for the fight. Mark was always down to dish out a beating. Fool him. Tyler just finished dealing with the disaster classes that were threatening the humans. So he was filled with adrenaline at this moment, and the only thing he wanted to do was to test his abilities against someone like Mark. He and Mark were both brawlers, so it would be a legendary battle. Stop this instant before I get angry. Didn't you see that we were trying to have a civil conversation here? Fiona's teasing voice froze Tyler in place as her blessing flowed off her in waves and made his heart shudder. Tyler knew that it was only her blessing that was making him feel this way, but he couldn't stop his reaction as he mellowed down immediately and grunted. Tyler was already used to Fiona's blessing, and she couldn't make him her lapdog like what she could do to other men because he was as strong as her, but it was still hard for him to disobey her when she tells him to do something. Once she spoke, Tyler felt his adrenaline calm down, and he put his hands in his pockets and turned away with another grunt. Fiona turned back to continue talking to Mark. Fiona knew that Tyler would be angry at her for a long time for using her blessing on him, but she basically just saved him from a beating. She now had more confidence in herself, and she was sure that her blessing was still working properly. So that means that there wasn't anything wrong with her blessing. Mark was just too strong for her to affect. There is no way that Tyler would have been able to win against Mark since Mark is obviously stronger than him. I don't know what happened to your girlfriend, but I can guess that you want to go to that island for some reason, right? If you're talking about the island 200 miles off the coast of this city, then I think you will definitely want to come with us. Potential danger had been neutralized. Fiona gave Mark another of her seductive looks that made her seem more alluring than any woman should be able to. But Mark just frowned and asked her to explain herself. What was on that island, and why would he need to come with her? Fiona frowned as she noticed that her blessing still didn't work on Mark again. She thought that throwing him off would make the blessing work, but it didn't. Fiona's blessing worked by affecting the central lobe of the brain that was responsible for critical thinking, and if a person is in a vulnerable state, then it was easier for her to affect their minds. But it felt like Mark's brain was impenetrable. Tyler grunted from the side and spoke up when he noticed that Fiona was too annoyed to speak. Tyler wanted to get out of here as quickly as possible, and Fiona was only wasting time. She should just tell him what he needs to know so that he will make a decision fast. There's been a lot of research about that island recently. Turns out that there are many heat signatures and some other unexplainable occurrences that have been happening here for a while now. We don't really understand all of it since we're not a part of the research team. But if you want to go to that island, then you should think about talking to the research team. Bam! Tyler looked to the side with a frown as Fiona suddenly slammed her elbow into his rib, and he wondered what the hell she was planning this time. She was always trying to control people to do whatever she wanted, and if not for the fact that Tyler knew she was not a bad person that would try and make people do something dangerous, then he would have already killed her a long time ago. What Tyler here is trying to say is that you will not get anything out of going to the island alone. The Artemis Guild is currently working together with the NSA, and we are planning a potential raid on that island in a few days. Maybe you can come along with the Artemis Guild. As a special guest of mine, that is. Mark ignored the sultry tone from Fiona and the notification that his system gave him that hindered another attempt by her to take over his mind. He couldn't wait that long to go to the island. Mark didn't know what they were planning to do on that island, but he believed them because Pat already told him that there were many heat signatures on that island, and that meant that there were many monsters there. Mark didn't know the ranking of these monsters, and if all of them were as strong as the ant-headed calamity that Mark just killed, then it would be impossible for him to fight through all of them to get to Eret. Since there were 5 hours before the helicopter got here, it might be more sensible for him to just go with the superhumans and find out more about the island. If Mark notices that they are not interested in going to the island to save Eret immediately, then he will leave and go on his own. Enhance. Fiona could see from Mark's eyes that he was not convinced. She thought that she would be able to convince him about going to the island and also make him interested in their guild at the same time. But it turns out that things cannot be that simple. Mark was going to need a lot more proof for him to see that he should go to that island alone. Very well then. You do not seem convinced, so let us take an excursion. I'm sure you'll feel a lot more willing to listen to what we have to say when you see what we have seen. Fiona's blessing flowed out from her once again and spread in all directions before grabbing hold of a man from over a kilometer away. Her blessing was strong enough that even from his distance, the man could understand what she wanted and obeyed her. Rat-a-tat-tat-ta. The man was the driver of the helicopter, and he was immediately forced to bring the helicopter towards them by Fiona's power. This was how easy it was for Fiona to get anything that she wanted. She didn't even have to say a single word. Spreading her blessing was enough for her to get anything that she wanted from anyone around her. In the eyes of humans, she was literally Aphrodite herself. Mark was skeptical about going with the superhumans now. He knew that there was no need for him to wait for their help since he was going to get a helicopter from Pat later today. But Mark also had no idea what he was going to be meeting on that island. Pat already said it before that there were many heat signatures on that island, and that meant that there were many monsters there. It would be better to learn more about monsters there and what kind of ranking those monsters had before going to save Eret. Mark was desperate to try and get Eret out of there, but he wasn't stupid enough to believe that he could fight through a nest of calamity-class monsters. The helicopter landed a few meters away from them, and Tilda bid them farewell as she had to go and look after Lightning Rider and make sure that the treatment was going well. She thanked Fiona and Tyler F.O. coming to help out in the battle, and Fiona only scoffed and told her that the Phoenix Guild owed the Artemis Guild a lot for the help that they gave them here, and she would be calling in the favor at a later date. Tilda understood how the world of superhuman politics worked, and she just thanked Fiona once more before she left. Once Tilda was gone, they all walked towards the helicopter and entered before it took off towards the National Superhuman Agency. Eret was cold. She huddled in on herself and shivered as she felt an intense cold dig deep into her bones and make her entire body hurt. Her wet uniform and socks only added to the cold, and it made her head feel like it was filled with water. There was no solace from the cold in this place, and the only thing that she could do was to hug herself tightly and hope that she would not be noticed by the many monsters that were walking around here. Eret had never seen something like this in her life. She was in an underground cavern that had stalactites growing from the ceiling and glowing with a light green hue to provide light for the environment, and that allowed her to get a glimpse of the things that surrounded her. There were monsters everywhere. Ant-headed monsters, fish-headed monsters, and even some monkey-type anima moved across the cavern floor, carrying scraps of food. Sometimes they would take animal flesh, and at other times they would take fish and even octopus deeper into the cavern. There was no stopping, and they just continued to do this while ignoring Aerith as she froze to death on the floor. Aerith had never read about something like this. She was someone that always wanted to know new things, so she loved to read, and Aerith had never heard of monsters working together like this. Why were they working together? According to what Aerith studied, the anima were mindless creatures that only followed their natural instinct to attack humans once they saw them. But if that is the case, then Aerith knew that she should be dead and the monsters here should not be working together. Were the humans wrong? Did they just not understand enough about the anima? And they went ahead and thought that anima were all mindless creatures that had no purpose? Or maybe this was something new that humans have just never seen before. Maybe the anima were evolving. All these thoughts went through Aerith's mind, and she only hugged herself tighter as the intensity of the situation made her shiver once more. "Mark, please, save me." Aerith could only think like this as she felt her body slowly going still. She had been hiding in the staff room, watching the television and trying to see if Ghost would win against the ant-headed anima that attacked the city, but she was stunned when she saw the face of Ghost. She had been looking for Mark all this time, but she had no idea that Mark was actually outside there fighting against that monster. She felt so stupid at that moment when all the various signs finally came into her mind and clicked into place. All the times that Mark would disappear from class and from the house. And all the time that he would come back with an injury that was too serious to be left untreated, and she would have to help him so that it doesn't get infected. Aerith thought that Mark was just a hooligan who liked to fight on the street, and someone who likes to play hooky. She had no idea that he was actually a superhuman. She should have known. All the signs were right in front of her, and she just kept on denying it because she trusted Mark more than anyone in her life. She was so stupid. She should have known. Aerith kept on thinking in this manner while she was hiding in the staff room, but she didn't have any time to react as she suddenly heard a massive force crash into the window of the staff room and into the room. Aerith turned around in shock, and she saw that it was a fish-headed anima that was looking around her room and sniffing the air. She immediately hid under the table and held her mouth with both hands. What was an anima doing here? I thought that the superhumans were taking care of them. I don't know if I'll be able to, but I ain't going nowhere without giving you lovely people a first-class view of the handsome devil himself. There were multiple journalists and even some YouTube influencers surrounding the helicopter on every side as it landed. No matter what the guards did, they couldn't stop the reporters from going crazy and trying to break through to see Mark and ask him some questions. It felt like the president himself was walking out from the copter. In fact, the president wouldn't even have these many people come and see him. This was the largest crowd that the NSA has ever seen since superhumans started appearing 4 years ago. Mark could hear the sounds of the reporters, even over the loud sound that the helicopter was making as it landed outside the National Superhuman Association building, and Mark came down from the helicopter along with Tyler and Fiona. Mark, do you have anything to say to the people at home? How do you feel now that your identity has been revealed? Was there a reason behind you hiding your identity? Are there people after you? Marky, won't you take a picture with Cutie Pie? Smile for the camera. Are you afraid that there will be more monsters to fight now that you defeated such a powerful anima? You are with Fiona and Tyler from the Artemis Guild. Do you intend to finally give up the solo act and join a guild? Are you going to join the National Superhumans Association, or are you going to remain as a vigilante? Questions were raining down on Mark nonstop, and Mark had to try his best to not hurt anyone as he pushed the cameras and microphones away from his face. Journalists were always so annoying. This is another reason why Mark didn't want to reveal his identity in the first place. Superhumans were some of the most popular people in the world, and there was never any privacy when they were involved. Journalists and the press were always trying to get either an interview or an exclusive statement. It was too overbearing because they just didn't know when to stop. They would keep trying until they got too far. There have been situations where superhumans have become too annoyed with journalists and injured them while trying to get them away. It was probably just a small mistake, since a superhuman is so strong that a simple slap would be enough to decapitate a human at once. But the media did not see it that way, and the superhuman was fined and restricted from going out in public by the NSA for a long time as punishment. As far as the media and the NSA were concerned, the humans were the weaker ones, so they deserved to be treated better than the superhumans. Mark constantly had to move microphones out of his face, and he grabbed one of the microphones and threw it behind him when a journalist constantly tried to press it against his face. Fiona and Tyler were also being asked a lot of questions, but they both ignored the press just like Mark, and the three of them finally managed to make it to the building and enter inside to get away from the journalists. It was silent inside the building, but there were many people who stopped moving once they saw Mark, and they began to point to him and murmur among themselves. The staff here were mainly humans, so they were just as awed by Mark's presence as the journalists outside. There were a few people that didn't bother to stop and stare, though, and one of them walked up to the trio of superhumans and spoke to Fiona. She was a beautiful woman with large breasts and a short stature that only made her chest stand out far more than it should have. She had red hair and blue eyes, and her eyes were constantly glancing towards Mark as she spoke. She wore a business suit and a black skirt that only went down to her knees, and she carried a tablet that she was constantly looking down at when she talked. She also wore a pair of large glasses, and Mark noticed that she was always touching it while glancing at him. She would push it up or just brush her hand against it, so Mark could only assume that she had some sort of complex about it. She looked to be around 20 years old, so she must have just graduated from the university recently. Did they use to tease her about her glasses? Mark was too confused to notice that she was trying to grab his attention by what she was doing, and Mark did not even bother to give her another glance. He couldn't start thinking of what she was trying to do since his mind was too occupied thinking about what Eric could be going through. He wanted to be done with this as quickly as possible. "Madam Fiona, we've prepared a room for you all. You can come right this way. The chairman is not in the building right now, but he heard about your request, and he has given us permission to show you what you want. There will be restrictions placed on what you can see since Master Mark has not yet been registered with the NSA, but I believe we can give enough information to allow Master Mark to make a decision." The woman looked down at her clipboard again before she started to lead them away from the main reception area and deeper into the building. Mark couldn't help but notice that she was walking directly in front of him, and her hips were swaying more than necessary. The woman didn't even try to hide the way that she was walking, and when they got to the room that they were meant to go into, she held the door open and glanced right at Mark. "I hope you have a pleasant meeting. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to find me." The woman handed her card over to Mark, and Mark only glanced down at it for a moment before looking back at her curiously. Her suggestive tone and the things she said while looking right at him immediately made him realize what she was talking about. And Mark raised a brow as she turned and walked down the hallway, while still swaying her hips like crazy. Was this some sort of joke? She was definitely trying to flirt with him, and there was no doubt that her last words were an invitation for him to find her. Mark shook his head and looked away from the woman as she turned the corner. He put her card in his pocket and decided that he would forget about it. This was something that he had never experienced before, so it was a big surprise for him. Were all superhumans treated like this? When he was a vigilante, no one ever tried something like this with him. Unimaginative slut. It will do you good to ignore people like her. There are a lot of them in the world of superhumans, and they will all want a piece of you since you are so powerful. You might bite off more than you can chew if you are not careful, little brother. You might bite off more than you can chew if you are not careful, little brother. Fiona said this as she walked into the room, and Mark could only wonder why the hell she was calling him her little brother all of a sudden. He hasn't even spoken to her before today. Fiona hated the way women always threw themselves at the superhuman males whenever they saw them, and she was going to have to give that woman a talking to later on. The superhuman males were the epitome of what masculinity was, so Fiona could understand that some of the women couldn't help themselves, but there were limits. How can you blatantly flirt with someone you know is still only a high schooler? Do you have no shame? Fiona is right. They will never stop throwing themselves at you, and they can get very annoying when they try too hard. But do not worry, there are some fun ones out there. Taylor patted Mark on the shoulder as he passed and said this, and Mark could see how Fiona turned around and glared at Taylor in anger once she heard it as well. Fiona started to reprimand Taylor, and Taylor just raised his hand and said he was only joking. But from the look he gave Mark could tell that the bastard was definitely not joking. Mark just shook his head as he accepted this strange side of the superhuman world. In a way, he wished he could have stayed anonymous for a little while longer. The inside of the room was almost like an interrogation room. There was a large table in the middle of the room, and 4 chairs were arranged around the table, 3 on one side and 1 on the other side. There was a man already sitting on one of the chairs. He wore a suit, and his black hair was gelled back to reveal his smooth, angular face. Mark couldn't feel the strength that he felt from Fiona and Taylor in the man, but Mark could tell that the man was also a superhuman. He was probably an E rank or maybe a D rank that was only in charge of handling minor problems around the office. The man invited Fiona and Taylor to join him on that side, while Mark went to sit on the other side of the table. Mark could only feel like he was in a police station, and they were about to start asking him questions. He didn't feel uncomfortable facing the 3 of them, but he knew that the man was trying to intimidate him, and it irritated him. He decided that he would just go through with this, so he could learn more about that island since they seemed to have more information on it than Pat. The man that was sitting in between Fiona and Taylor introduced himself as Gray. He told Mark that he was a D-rank superhuman, and he was the researcher in charge of handling the dissemination of information regarding the island. He didn't shake Mark's hand, and he spoke with a professional tone that automatically created a distance between himself and Mark. It was like he was trying to make it clear that he was a higher rank than Mark, even though Mark was stronger than him, and Mark should give him respect. Mark just folded his hands and sat back with a bored look in his eyes. If the man didn't start talking soon, Mark was going to leave. That island is something that we have been watching for a long time now. We don't know everything about the island, but what we do know is that it is far more dangerous than we first thought. But before anything else, we have to first evaluate your eligibility to receive this information. We already know you are of a high enough rank, since you must be at least a high-level A rank to be able to defeat a calamity class. But we also need to know who your patron god is as well as the blessing that you received. These things will tell us whether or not you can be given the information. Honestly, the man did not need this information at all. Both Fiona and Taylor knew that the man did not need this information, but they both stayed silent since this was just how things were done in the NSA. The NSA liked to keep track of every superhuman, and they would always need to know who the patron god of the superhumans was along with their blessing. Mark kept his heavy gaze on the man once the man said this, and the man gazed right back at Mark with equal intensity. Mark didn't know how things were done here, but he didn't feel comfortable telling anyone about his system. Mark knew that it would be a great advantage for him to keep his system a secret, and he would rather not tell them about it. So Mark just made up a fake power and told them about that. His powers weren't as flashy as fire or lightning, so he didn't need to tell them the truth for them to believe him. I have the ability to gain extra power the more enemies I kill. The amount of power I gain depends on the strength of the enemy and the amount of effort I put into killing it. I don't know my patron god. Comment from Gog. You're really denying me, Mark? After everything I've done for you? You ungrateful, virgin mortal bastard. Mark felt his eye twitch as he read what Sozin sent to him through his system and quickly closed it with a thought while ignoring the childish god. Mark knew that Sozin wasn't really angry. If Sozin was angry, then there wouldn't be such a response, and the message from Sozin would sound far more threatening. Sozin was literally just having fun. The other 3 people in the room were not as amused by what Mark said as Sozin was, and his words put them into deep contemplation as they all thought about what sort of power he had. They all immediately recognized that Mark's power was very impressive, and there was a feeling of desperation in Fiona as she wanted to get Mark to join her guild now more than ever. There was only one other person in the world who could claim to have a power that was as ambiguous as Mark, and that person was one of the strongest S ranks in Japan. She was a woman blessed by the god of war, and she had the power to grow in strength as she fought against stronger enemies. The stronger her enemy, the more power she could bring out from within. There hasn't been a single battle that she has lost because she has been able to match her enemies blow for blow every time and outlast them. Her name was Megumi Yoshida, and she was known as the Battle Angel of Japan. Is Mark also blessed by the god of war? That could be the reason why he can gain power as he kills. Gray could only think like this as he looked at Mark with new eyes. Mark was no longer someone who was just strong. Mark was now someone that the NSA would want under their wing at any cost. Gray leaned forward and spoke in a grave tone. You say that you do not know your patron god, but how can I know that you are not lying? Something like that is a big deal, and the NSA cannot just trust you without first finding out who is giving you your powers. But there is another way. The NSA will be more willing to help you if you are ready to take on our flag and become a core member of the association. I am sure this will not only be good for you, but also for your missing friend. After all, you want to save her at any cost, right? Joining the NSA will make us more motivated to help you since you will be one of our own. Slam. Crash. Wow, you've really done it now. Wow, you've really done it now. Fiona could only say this as she watched the look of intense anger spread across Mark's face. Fiona knew that Gray was already saying too much, and it would not end well for him. She was not surprised by the anger that Mark was showing now. Mark has been listening to Gray right from the beginning. At first, Mark only thought that Gray was a little annoying. He didn't care that Gray didn't believe him about his patron god, and he wasn't going to bother trying to explain himself. But the more Gray spoke, the more the anger inside him kept growing until Gray finally said something about Eric. Mark slammed his fist on the table, and it came crashing down to the floor like it was made of styrofoam. Even Tyler could feel the great amount of anger radiating off Mark. When Mark spoke, it sent a shiver through Gray's body from how intense it was. Hey, you fucking cockroach. Are you threatening me right now? Are you threatening me with my friend's life? Do you think that I won't tear your mouth apart just because you're a member of the NSA? I fucking dare you to say her name one more time. Gray's throat felt extremely dry, and he had to swallow nervously as he saw Mark's gaze becoming murderous. Maybe he went too far in trying to recruit Mark. Sorry, perhaps I went too far right now. I shouldn't have tried to use that as a recruiting strategy. If you let me start over again. No, get out. Mark said this in a final tone, and Gray's mouth snapped shut as he ran a hand through his hair. He would have tried to argue, but he knew that he was not in a position to try and stand his ground. Gray knew that if Mark hit him here, then he would definitely be visiting the ER. Even if Gray was superhuman, he was nothing compared to Mark. Gray looked from Fiona to Tyler, and he noticed how both of them were just ignoring him and allowing Mark to do whatever he wanted. Why would Fiona try to help him? Fiona was interested in Mark, and she wanted to try and recruit him into her Artemis Guild later. So why should she help the NSA to recruit him? Fiona was not going to stop Gray from trying to recruit Mark, since she still wanted a good relationship with the NSA, but that doesn't mean she needed to bail him out when he does something as stupid as this. Gray was on his own, and he could only swallow his pride and pack up his books. Gray knew he was going to get a serious warning from his boss later because of how he handled this situation. I apologize once more. Another representative will come to speak to you and show you the information that you wanted to see. I never intended to sour your relationship with the NSA. Immediately after saying this, Gray left the room, and Mark leaned back and sighed silently as he let go of his anger. Fiona only chuckled slightly as she appreciated how Mark handled the situation. Mark might be a teenager, but he was definitely not a pushover. Most superhumans would either agree to what Gray said, or they would get so angry that they would immediately attack Gray. But Mark was able to control his anger and only told Gray to get out. That showed a lot of restraint from Mark, and now Fiona wanted him in her guild even more than before. But Fiona still held back from saying anything about recruiting him as she spoke. Very impressive. That was quite a lot of restraint from you to not attack that man. It will not be so bad having someone like you on my side, a little brother that I could dote over as much as he wanted. Potential danger has been neutralized. Mark glanced at his system as another prompt came up, telling him that Fiona was once again trying to use her blessing on him, and he eyed her with an irritated look on his face. Why was she so adamant to get inside his head and make him into her little brother? Was it some sort of fetish that she had? Or was it something related to her blessing that gave her more control over people? She has become more and more subtle with the way she tried to use her blessing on him, and it was starting to piss Mark off. Fiona blinked as she saw the irritated look on Mark's face, and she immediately figured that Mark was not under her influence this time either. But this time there was something different. At first, Fiona thought that Mark could just repel her blessing, and she assumed that she only needed to be more subtle about how she used her blessing so that he would not notice at all. But she was wrong. It wasn't that Mark could only repel her blessing. It was like Mark knew exactly when she used her blessing, and he was able to tell when she tried to put him under her influence, even if it was barely noticeable. How irritating. Fiona's pride took a big hit as she realized this, and she huffed internally. She has never seen anyone that could withstand her blessing when it was that subtle. Fiona could put subtle suggestions into people's heads and make them do whatever she wanted. If she was subtle enough, then they would never even know that they were under her control. They would just think that they were doing what they always wanted to do. But Fiona couldn't do that to Mark, and it pissed her off. Stop trying to get inside my head. It's starting to piss me off. Next time you try something like that, we will settle it the old-fashioned way. And I will not hold back just because you are a woman. Mark said this to Fiona while turning towards the door as another person entered, and Fiona immediately understood what Mark meant by the old-fashioned way. Was Mark really thinking of fighting her? She had no intention of doing that, and she huffed like a child and crossed her legs before folding her hands under her large breasts and making it bounce slightly as she turned away from Mark in annoyance. You're not cute at all, little brother. Who wouldn't be happy being one of my underlings and serving my every whim? I'll take care of you so much you'll think you're in heaven. Fiona could only say this as she turned away, but she didn't try to get into Mark's head anymore. Fiona knew that trying to get into his head again was only going to antagonize him, and she didn't want him to be too angry with her, so that when she tried to get him to join her guild, he would at least think about it. And also, Fiona knew already tell that in a straight fight between her and Mark, he would fuck her up. Fiona wasn't a physically established superhuman. She was strong, but she couldn't compare to the likes of Tyler or Mark in physical abilities. She depended more on her ability to make her enemy let down their guard when she got inside their head. It would be a disaster to fight Mark when she couldn't even use her blessing on him. Fiona wouldn't stand a chance if she fought against Mark when she knew that her blessing wouldn't work against him. I heard from Mr. Gray that there was a need for a replacement since there was a small problem. I'm Millicent with 1L. It's a pleasure to meet you superhumans. Especially you, Mr. Mark Vanitas. The woman who entered the room after Gray left finally spoke when she noticed that Fiona and Mark were no longer talking. She was a tall woman with modest assets and a slight athletic build. She wore a business suit with long black pants that hugged her legs beautifully, and her entire demeanor gave off a very professional vibe. Fiona immediately recognized Millicent as one of the C-rank superhumans who was a direct assistant to the president of the company. Fiona raised a brow as Millicent failed to introduce herself properly, and she just decided not to say anything. Fiona was sure that the president was the one who sent Millicent here for a reason, and she would only sit back and watch what they were trying to do this time. As Millicent spoke, she looked down at the table that was broken in the middle of the room, typed something into her phone, and made a call to someone outside the room. A few seconds later, a man entered the room with a new table over his shoulders. He dropped the table to the ground and carried the broken table away with him before closing the door. The man that just left was a superhuman handyman in charge of handling all the broken tools and equipment in the NSA, so carrying the table alone was easy for him. Once he was gone, Millicent walked up to the side wall and spoke professionally. Now then, shall we begin? Mark nodded to Millicent, and she smiled and gestured to the ceiling with her hand. The light in the room dimmed, and Mark saw the wall glow before a large screen was projected on it from a small projector hidden in the ceiling. The first thing that showed up on the screen was a large map of the world before it slowly started to zoom into the continent of America and finally panned out until it was hovering over a single island close to City A. 1 year ago, some researchers that were trying to track the movement of anima in and around America noticed a strange phenomenon occurring close to this island. Various heat signatures were congregating towards it, and we thought at first that these were humans. But further investigation showed us that these were not, in fact, humans. They were anima heat signatures, and they were all moving towards the island as a single unit. There are no humans on the island, as far as we know, so there was no sensible reason for the anima to want to go there. We decided that we would wait longer and see what the reason for this migration could be. But this proved to be a mistake. As time went on, we started to notice signs of organized activity from the anima that went to this island. They all started to build, but they weren't building over the ground. Instead, they were digging tunnels that went deep into the island and started to create pathways underground for them to move through. It was as though they had become a part of a larger society, something like an ant colony. The NSA sent a small group of 3A rank and 5B rank superhumans to the island, hoping to find the reason behind this strange behavior. But even though the superhumans we sent had some of the strongest stealth-based blessings, they were immediately detected by the anima and eliminated. Mark narrowed his eyes as some images of the stealth team before and after the anima found them were shown. They were completely torn apart by the anima, but the anima didn't seem to have eaten them at all, and they started to carry the torn human flesh into the tunnel underground. What in the world are they doing with those pieces? Mark immediately became worried that the anima would do the same thing to Aerith. Would they rip her apart like this? But the only thing that calmed Mark's anxiety was the fact that his system mission was still active, and it would not be active unless Aerith was alive. Mark shook this thought out of his head as he went back to listening to Millicent's explanation. After the failed expedition, we decided that we would set up a more elite team of superhumans involving members for various guilds. The Artemis Guild is one of the guilds that have offered to provide support, and in all, we have amassed a force of more than 20A ranks and 3S ranks along with many other B ranks. Based on recent emergencies, we estimate that there is more than one country-level calamity on the island along with many other disaster-class monsters. We already accounted for the calamities by including Fiona and Tyler in the raid, but just to be sure, we also added in 3S ranks to prepare for any unpredictable occurrences. We believe that the anima on that island were more interested in making their colony than they were in killing humans, so we didn't think we had to rush anything, but the recent attacks on City have changed that thought, and we now know that something has to be done. We are likely going to start the operation very soon. Mark listened to all this silently, and through all of this, he couldn't help but wonder if they were wrong. How can they be sure that the monsters on that island won't be stronger than they predicted? They were only going to that island based on the assumption that the S ranks were stronger than any anima they could encounter. What would you do if the superhumans you send are not strong enough to handle the monsters on that island? Shouldn't you involve other guilds and ask for their help? A sour look crossed over Millicent's face once she heard Mark say this. Mark didn't know if it was because of what he said regarding their research or if she was angry about him advising her to talk to other guilds. In the short time that he has been here, Mark could tell that the NSA did not play nice with other guilds. It seemed like they only tolerated their presence for some reason. Mark waited to see what Millicent would say, and once she spoke, Mark realized that she was annoyed about everything that came out of his mouth. We have done extensive research regarding the possible monsters that would appear on the island. Researchers and superhumans died in order to bring us substantial information during their last trip. So I would appreciate it if you didn't undermine our work for the sake of your curiosity. Mark shrugged at this, and Millicent continued. And with regards to the other guilds, this mission was open for all guilds to accept. There were no restrictions placed on it, and we even sent out written letters to the heads of various guilds. The Athena Guild was the only one that responded. According to the others, they required more financial compensation for the risk involved. We do not need such fools who are not aware of the dangers faced by the people of the city. She has a very sharp tongue. Mark chuckled as this thought filtered through his mind, and he could only nod along as Millicent continued to talk. Mark knew that the NSA had every right to be spiteful with regards to the other guilds not accepting to join the mission, but Mark just hoped that they weren't allowing their anger to cloud their sensibility. If the superhumans go to that island, and the monsters there turn out to be much stronger than initially estimated, then there's no way anyone would be coming back alive. The superhumans go to that island, and the monsters there turn out to be much stronger than initially estimated, then there is no way anyone would be coming back alive. But that is none of my business. I'm only going there for Eret after all. Mark leaned back and continued to listen as Millicent pointed out another spot on the map. We plan to give a beacon to the weaker members of the team to allow them to call for help if they are in trouble. That way, stronger members who are not busy will be able to move towards the weaker ones and aid them. Slam! The door leading to the room suddenly crashed open, and everyone turned to look at it in surprise. There was an old man standing there in a full suit. The old man was heavily built, and immediately Mark saw him. Mark knew that this man was a superhuman. There was no doubt about it. The old man had a wide grin on his face that made him look like a crazy person as he grabbed his shirt and ripped it open. Rip! Mark was shocked by this, and he thought that the man was insane. Why the hell are you taking off your shirt once you enter a room? Are you some sort of stripper? The old man turned out to be extremely buff under his shirt. His muscles were toned, and they looked perfect for fighting. There was a large scar running across his stomach, and it looked like it had only recently healed from an intense battle. Mark didn't have any intention of finding out what an old stripper looked like, and he was already standing up to leave, but Mark was even more shocked as a prompt suddenly appeared on his system. New mission alert. Hold back the attacker for 5 minutes. Reward: plus 50 strength points, plus 50 mana points. Failure: nil. Mark saw these messages, and he immediately rushed to his feet as he understood what was happening. This bastard was attacking him. Slam! Millicent suddenly jumped to the side as a force stronger than anything Mark had ever felt before suddenly slammed into him. And Mark only managed to cross his hands in front of his body to protect himself as he was sent flying through the wall of the room. Crash! Mark flipped around and slammed his feet into the ground before looking up to see that the old man was right on top of him with his arm drawn back. Mark cocked his hand back and met the old man in the middle of the room. Boom! Roar! Mark gritted his teeth and grunted as he pushed against the old man's fist with his own before sending the old man flying back. Boom! The old man was sent right back through the wall that they just crashed through, but the old man didn't even waste a second as he flew to his feet and rushed at Mark again. Mark also ran towards the old man, and they both started to exchange blows at an insane pace. Boom! 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 Back in the viewing room, Fiona sat up and started to walk backward in order to prevent them from getting close to her. She was not interested in being collateral damage in something like this. She also had no idea why the old man attacked Mark, but she knew who the old man was, and she also knew that he was the sort of person who could do whatever he wanted without anyone reprimanding him. She could only watch curiously as the two of them destroyed a second wall and finally burst into the main hall of the NSA. Tyler was vibrating in excitement as he had to hold himself back physically from joining in on the fight. Tyler was someone who loved battle, and he was desperate to get involved in this fight. But Fiona was using her blessing to hold him back from getting involved because Fiona didn't want him to tarnish the Artemis Guild's name by attacking Mark. Slam! What the hell are they doing? They're coming through here. Run! The two fighting men were causing a large commotion as they tore through the NSA in their fight. Mark grabbed the old man by the wrist and dragged him up before turning around with a shout and throwing him into the ground. Boom! The old man's eyes widened in pain, but he was even more surprised as Mark threw him into the air and sent him flying through the ceiling. Mark jumped into the air and drew his hand back as he threw 3 consecutive punches. Bang! 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 Critical strike. Kaboom! The old man had been blocking most of Mark's strikes with his arms crossed, but he was shocked when one of Mark's strikes suddenly felt much heavier than the others, and he was sent flying back from the intensity. He crashed into the wall of the room that they were fighting in, and he suddenly opened his mouth loudly and began to laugh. The critical strike ability allowed Mark to hit his target with twice the amount of power than normal, and it was strong enough that something like that ant-headed anima from before would have immediately died if it was hit with even one of them. But the old man was only laughing it off like it was nothing. This man's defense is no joke. Mark heard the man laughing, and he flexed his hands to loosen the tension there before ducking low and dashing in again. Mark was only able to get the critical hit by luck. Mark only gave 5 consecutive hits, so the probability of getting the critical strike was only at 5%, and Mark was lucky enough to get it. Mark knew that from now on, it would be more difficult to get the critical strike. Ha 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 ha. Yes, yes. Show me more. Show me what you are made of, Mark Vanitas. Mark didn't bother to respond as he rushed in with another fierce flurry of attacks. He ducked under the man's swing and sent a hit that sent the old man flying through the air. The old man flipped and used the wall as a ledge to launch himself towards Mark. He grabbed Mark around the waist, and the both of them crashed through the wall of the room and entered the next room. Holy shit, are we under attack? There were 2 officers having fun inside the room. They were standing closely and talking quietly between themselves as the male officer there was flirting with the beautiful female officer. But once the 2 superhumans crashed through the wall, the male officer ducked low in shock and reached for his gun as he shouted in shock. He quickly began to pull his trousers up, and the female officer jumped to her feet and also started to dress while reaching for her gun. But both officers could only hold their fire and stare in shock as they saw who the old man was. They couldn't shoot at him even if they wanted to. What the hell is the chairman doing now? He is going to destroy this building. It doesn't matter. We have to get out of here. Call Talia. She's the only one that can stop him. Bam, 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 bam. The old man was attacking Mark relentlessly, and Mark was guarding perfectly against the old man's attacks. The old man knew that at this rate, he would not be able to break through Mark's defenses since Mark was perfect at blocking and defending. The old man had to admit that he was not as physically strong as Mark, and he knew that he would have to change his strategy if he wanted to win this fight. That was perfectly fine with him, though. He never intended to win against Mark with only brute strength. His true power was in something else. Mark suddenly stopped defending as he noticed the old man's stance loosening, and Mark's hands blurred as 5 strikes landed. Bang, 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 bang. Critical strike. Boom. There was a massive distortion of wind that echoed out from the man's fist as he sent a punch right back at Mark. Their 2 fists collided in the middle, and Mark was shocked when the man's hit canceled out his own. The old man clenched his fists at his side and went into a new fighting stance as waves began to echo out from his body. Mark thought that they were waves of wind, but he was wrong. They weren't from the wind at all. They were from sound. The man suddenly disappeared faster than before and appeared in front of Mark with his arm drawn back, and Mark put up his hands to defend himself. Kaboom! The ground under Mark's feet couldn't even withstand the force of the hit, and Mark was sent crashing through the floor and into the room below. The old man propelled himself down to continue attacking, but he was immediately grabbed by Mark and thrown into the wall with a shout. Arg! Smash! The old man sent a wave of sound out from his back, and his momentum was slowed before he could crash into the wall. The wall behind him cracked and splintered, but there was barely any damage done to him as he landed on the floor before he could hit the wall. Once Mark saw this, Mark immediately began to analyze what sort of power the old man could have. At first, Mark thought that it was a wind-based ability from the god of wind, but that would not make sense since Mark hadn't felt a single gust of wind since the man started using his ability. Even when they clashed fists and the man used that strange power to cancel out Mark's critical hit, Mark didn't feel any wind. So he was sure that the man's power was not related to the wind at all. Then what could it be related to? Was it some sort of wave? Maybe he would use pressure waves to cancel out my hits? If that's the case, then it will be a lot more troublesome. Pressure waves can't be anticipated as quickly as wind. I wouldn't know when he's using it and when he isn't. Mark's thoughts were running wild as he wondered how he could fight against a power like that. He would have to break through the wave defense somehow, But the most important thing right now was finding out what the hell this man was doing. Why the fuck are you attacking me? I don't think I've ever met you before, so there's definitely no reason for us to even fight. I would remember someone like you if we ran into each other in the street, or if we had a falling out big enough to warrant this sort of attack. You've definitely never met me before today. So what could you be trying to gain from attacking me, you old bastard? Mark never let down his guard as he said all this, and the old man only grinned and went into his fighting position to prepare himself to attack again. You should have more respect for your elders, boy. I only respect sensible people. And from the little I know about you now, it's obvious that you're fucking crazy. You're old enough to be someone's grandfather, and you're still acting like a battle junkie? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? The old man only laughed as he blasted off the floor and attacked Mark again. Mark was not far from the truth with his deductions about the man's power. The old man was one of the superhumans blessed by the god of music, and he had the ability to release sound waves from any point in his body to make his attacks more brutal and multiply the damage done. Right now, the old man was using his blessing to amplify his punching ability as well as to nullify damage. It was a simple power, but it was extremely effective. As long as the old man knew where the attack was going to come from, he could use sound waves to reduce the impact of the attack and receive almost no damage. I'm sure he can't cancel out a full attack from me. One punch with everything I have should be able to end this. Mark decided that he was going to put all of his power into one strike and break through the man's defense with it. As far as Mark knew, the man was using some sort of pressure wave to protect himself, but the old man could only apply so much pressure before it loses out against a much stronger force. Mark sent mana straight to his arm, and he felt his power increase as the mana added extra strength and stamina points. Strength plus 70, stamina plus 58. The old man rushed towards Mark and sent a brutal fist forward, but he was shocked when he didn't see Mark move at all. Instead of dodging, Mark stepped forward and sent his punch at the old man. Whoosh! The old man's eyes widened as he didn't even see the punch as it was moving. In only a split second, thousands of scenarios ran through the man's mind. And in all of those scenarios, there was none of them where he was able to tank that punch without serious injury. The old man immediately abandoned his own hit and raised his hand in an X as he applied massive amounts of his mana to his forearm. Tun! An intense sound wave echoed out from his entire body and intercepted Mark's blow, but the man was stunned as the sound wave seemed to do nothing as the punch sped through the defense and hit him. Critical strike. Bam! After hitting the man more than 10 consecutive times, the chances of hitting a critical strike were over 10%. AMD Mark's luck was so great that he was able to tear through that limit and produce another critical strike immediately. The superhuman system didn't add stats like luck or charisma to the manipulatable stats because those stats were not meant to be manipulated by the user. Those stats were too powerful, and even the system couldn't manipulate them however it wanted. They were stats that the user was born with, and only your ability and willingness to improve yourself would give you more luck or charisma. But Mark was already extremely lucky, even without adding any points to his luck. Mark was able to survive against an Armageddon, beat the Armageddon, and then he managed to fight against Anima for 4 years without losing his life. That was not something that anyone could do without having an insane amount of luck. So getting something like the critical strike back-to-back without having a 100% chance was possible for him. Enhance. The old man's feet dug into the ground, and he was sent skidding across the floor as his legs created deep trenches. The man tightened his fists, and he grunted as he felt a throbbing sensation on his forearms. What sort of punch was that? Mark's strength suddenly increased massively, and it felt like his bones were on fire. Whoosh! Mark charged in for another strike, but a loud voice suddenly shouted from the other side of the room. Both men stopped as the female voice shook the entire building from how loud she was shouting. You old fool! What do you think you're doing? This is not okay at all. Look how you're scaring all the people in the building and making them run away. Even the reporters outside are afraid that were under attack. Mark noticed how the old man immediately relaxed his stance once he heard the girl shouting, and Mark eyed him suspiciously for a moment as he kept his guard up. The old man could only be trying to fool him into thinking he was lowering his guard before attacking when he least expected it. But after there was no more movement from the old man, Mark finally realized that the old man was no longer going to attack, and he also relaxed his stance. Mark turned to look at who was shouting. He expected to see an imposing female figure exuding strength and elegance. There was no way an ordinary person could stop this old man from attacking like that. But when Mark looked to the side, he couldn't see anything. He raised a brow and allowed his eyes to trail down and down and down. Who's the midget? Mark couldn't help himself once he saw the tiny person who had been shouting at the old man, and he immediately called her a midget. She was a little girl with blue hair and blue eyes, carrying a giant teddy bear with one of her hands while pointing angrily at the two of them. She was wearing a long white gown that came down to her knees and a pair of white shoes. Mark didn't know how she was able to make the building shake with that tiny body of hers. Was she some sort of superhuman? That was crazy. She was barely 6 years old, and she was also a superhuman. Once the little girl heard Mark call her a midget, her entire face turned red as she blushed, and her pout deepened in anger. Who was this fool calling her a midget? At least she wasn't a fool who fought in a populated building and put the lives of everyone there in danger. She was here trying to help him, and he was insulting her. She should just leave him and allow her grandfather to keep doing whatever he wanted. That would teach him not to insult her. This little girl was Talia Dragonheart, the only granddaughter and last living family member of the old man who attacked Mark. Mark didn't know it, but he was currently in the presence of two of the strongest A-rank superhumans in the world. Talia was born only 2 years before the Armageddon-class Anima attacked the world. She and her parents were alone when it happened, and they couldn't do anything as their house was brought down on them. But even after her parents died, Talia managed to survive under the wreckage. She was still holding tightly to a teddy bear that her father got for her a long time ago, as she cried while the Armageddon walked over her and sent the rest of the house crashing down on her. But it was at that moment that the goddess of fertility decided that she would grant her blessing to Talia and give her the strength to fight back. The goddess of fertility was one of the high-tier gods. The only other gods who had the ability to stand against her in terms of cosmic power were the god of games, Sozin, the god of death, Thanatos, the god of war, Ares, and the goddess of life and light, Amaterasu. These 5 gods were regarded as the 5 strongest gods in terms of cosmic power alone. Talia received a lot of power from the goddess of fertility, but there was nothing that Talia could do with the power. She was only a 2-year-old child, and she could not fight back even if she wanted to. The only thing that Talia could do at that time was to cry at the top of her lungs. But the goddess of fertility realized that Talia would not be able to fight, and she changed her blessing, giving Talia the power to give life to other non-living creatures that would be loyal to her and fight for her. Talia became the youngest summoner alive. That was when the teddy bear that Talia had with her suddenly came to life and blocked the falling stones that were going to crush Talia before they could harm her. The teddy bear carried little Talia away and brought her to her grandfather, and he has been taking care of her ever since. Even though Talia was 2 years old, she had already lost more than most people would lose in their entire lifetimes, and her grandfather swore to take care of her properly no matter what. Talia's power was very versatile because it allowed her to make her summons as strong as she wanted by adding in more mana. That meant that she could create a summon that had the power of an S rank by giving it enough mana to fight against S ranks. Although she was not a regular on the battlefield, she was very popular in the superhuman world, and people liked to call her princess because of her pompous but cute personality. Right now, Talia only had enough power to create A-rank summons, but since Talia could create more than one summon at a time, she was seen as one of the strongest A-rank superhumans in the country due to her versatility. Her main role in any battle was to help those that were trapped under debris in buildings during and after anima attacks. So she was a very important member of the NSA. Fool! Who do you think you're calling a midget? I'll make my teddy bear break your head if you aren't careful. Fool! Baka! Mark blinked in surprise as the little girl exploded in anger, and he only cocked his head and stared at her curiously. In a way, she reminded him a lot of Aerith. They were both always shouting at him. But this girl, she was just too cute. She looked like she was going to pass out any moment from how red her face was, but she was not stopping, and she continued to shout at Mark in anger. Mark walked up to her, put his hands under her armpits, and carried her up. Her blush immediately deepened. Put me down. Put me down. Put me down right now. I'll send my teddy after you. Talia's mana was already surging as she said this, and she was preparing to bring her large teddy bear to life. She was going to blow Mark to oblivion. Talia! The old man who was fighting against Mark suddenly spoke up from behind, and Talia was forced to stop as she pouted again and looked away with a huff. Talia was already prepared to activate her power, but she had to hold herself back because she knew that she was forbidden from using her power unless it was necessary. Her grandfather told her that her power was too strong and she shouldn't use it unless she was in danger that she knew she could not escape from. That meant she couldn't use it against Mark, or her grandfather would get angry at her. You're already insulting me when you haven't even introduced yourself to me yet. It's proper manners to introduce yourself before anything else. I'm Mark Vanitas. What's your name? I'm Talia Dragonheart. You may call me your highness. Now let go of me. Talia was angry that Mark just carried her like it was nothing. She is a princess, and she refuses to be treated like this. But Talia was still a child, and she could only do what Mark told her to do because she knew that he was right. She was rude by not introducing herself first, and she shouldn't have done that. Her grandfather always told her that she should try to be nice to people whenever she got the chance. Mark frowned once he heard her introduction. He liked the fact that she was still innocent enough to know when she did something wrong, but she shouldn't say things like that. She was too cute to be calling people names. Little girls shouldn't have a mouth as foul as yours. You're going to ruin your beauty with that mouth if you keep talking like that. Enhance, little girls shouldn't have a mouth as foul as yours. You're going to ruin your beauty with that mouth if you keep talking like that. Mark had a serious soft spot for children, and he just couldn't help himself when he saw the little girl and how cute she was. She looked like she came straight out of a fairy tale with her giant teddy bear and her long blue hair. Let go, you barbarian. The girl sent a fist at Mark, and it slammed into Mark's face, but it didn't even make him budge as if there was no power behind it at all. Mark raised a brow, and the girl shouted at him to drop her this instant. She wasn't a little girl, and she could do whatever she wanted. Mark only smiled at her enthusiasm before he dropped her to the ground and pat her on the head. She was too cute. The little girl screamed in anger as Mark pat her head, and she started to jump to get his hand away from her. What was he doing? It took her very long to make her hair in the morning. Her grandfather would comb her hair for her for more than 20 minutes before it became like this. He was ruining it. The little girl would never say that it felt nice when Mark pat her head. She liked the feeling a lot, but she would never tell him that. She only glared at Mark and kicked his shin in anger. Bam! The force of that kick would have been enough to break the leg of anyone else immediately. Talia might only be a little child, but she was still regarded as an A-rank superhuman, and she was stronger than any human could ever hope to be. But against a superhuman like Mark, who specialized in tempering his body, the kick was nothing. Mark just smiled at her anger and ruffled her hair again. I didn't think that you would only have this much power, Ghost. You've been fighting against Anima for 4 years, and you've amassed a lot of skill, but you are barely strong enough to push me back. Mark turned around and glared at the old man once he heard him say this. Mark looked down at the old man's hands, and he saw how it was throbbing from the punch that he gave him, and Mark knew that the old man was lying. If Mark had given him another of those punches, then Mark would have definitely won that fight easily. Was this bastard trying to look cool by acting like he was going to win in that fight? Or was it because his granddaughter was here? I don't care who you are, old man, and if I wasn't so busy, then I would have continued this fight with you. But I have things to do. My friend is in danger, and I'm not going to stay here and play this stupid game with you while she could be dying. Mark said this irritably, and he put his hand to his ear to call Pat to bring the helicopter faster. It hadn't yet been 5 hours, but Pat had to hurry so he could get to that island. But there was nothing in his ear, and Mark realized that he had dropped his ear pod somewhere between the fight. He would have to go and grab someone's phone to call Pat. Mark began to walk out of the room, but the man called him back as he spoke. Join the National Association of Superhumans. I know this has already been offered to you once before, but this time the chairman of the association, James Dragonheart himself, is telling you to join. There's a lot to be gained from joining this NSA. Mark rose a brow in surprise once the man said this. So this is the chairman of the NSA. What the heck is a chairman doing acting like this? Who was going to pay for all the damage that they just caused to the building? Or were they really just so rich that they could destroy the building and build it back up like it was nothing? If they were that rich, then they should think about giving their superhumans higher pay, so they can employ more sensible people. I think I already told the other guy what I think of the NSA. You should show some tact and not bring it up again. I am not going to join an organization that is willing to use my friend's life to threaten me. Mark was not going to join the NSA. It wasn't just because of that fool Gray who tried to use Eric's life as a bargaining chip to make him join, but it was also because of all the restrictions that the NSA placed on superhumans. There were far too many of them, and Mark liked his freedom too much to allow himself to be trapped in some organization like this one. If they kept on trying to recruit him, then Mark would rather join some random no-name guild just to get away from them. James knew that he couldn't force Mark to join the NSA if he didn't want to. There were laws prohibiting the NSA from forcing superhumans to join them, and these laws were seriously enforced because of all the issues that the country has had with superhumans in the past. Superhumans were given the freedom to join any guild after they registered with the NSA, but this has prevented the NSA from having many members since most superhumans would prefer to join a guild instead. James changed his tactic immediately and said something else. The subjugation team is planning to raid the island at nightfall today. There has been too much movement from the anima there, and we don't intend to let them make it to the shore before we do something about it. If you join the NSA, then I'll allow you to join the subjugation team. But if you don't, then I'll lock your registration to the NSA and restrict your movement for the next 24 hours. We will go to this island and clear it out, but you will not be allowed to join us. Boom! Mark's mana surged across his entire body as he got right in James' face. James' eyes widened as he noticed that Mark moved faster than before. Was Mark holding back even more of his power during their fight? Mark was ready to beat the crap out of James right then and now. Why are these people so annoying? They just kept trying to piss Mark off, and they were using Eric's life as collateral just to try and make him join them. Is that how desperate they are to make an enemy of him? James and Mark were caught in an intense stare down as great pressure filled the entire room. Stop! 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 Talia immediately noticed that they both were going to start fighting again, and she shouted at them not to even try it. She was not going to let them fight, and they would have to go past her if they wanted to start again. Talia ran into their middle and raised her hands wide as she prevented them from getting close to each other. Mark glared hard at James as he bared his teeth at him. I don't care if the entire country tries to stop me from going to that island. Nothing is keeping me away, and I'll kill anyone that stands in my way. And when I'm done doing whatever the fuck I want, I'll leave this country and go to Japan. I'll join their NSA and help them instead, just so I can keep fucking you over from the other side of the world. James narrowed his eyes at Mark as he mentioned Japan, and he grit his teeth for a moment before he turned and began to walk away. America and Japan have never been on good terms, and they were only at peace because they had a common enemy in the anima. If someone like Mark leaves America and goes to Japan, then Japan would do anything they can to protect Mark and make sure that America cannot get him back. At his current strength, Mark was practically an S rank already. It would be a disaster if the higher-ups found out that they let Mark leave for Japan because of something like this. James could even lose his job because the strength of an S rank is not something that America can afford to lose. They didn't care if Mark went to a guild. All they cared about was whether or not Mark was in America. If Mark decides to leave the country, then they could probably stop him with the help of various other S ranks. But at what cost? The amount of damage to both life and property that would be done will be immeasurable, and they will lose far more than if they just allowed Mark to leave on his own. And James remembered that Mark told Gray that his power allowed him to grow stronger the more he killed. That was the kind of power that would be frowned upon by any good person, but James could only see the potential that Mark had. That is why James wanted Mark more than anything else right now. If Mark joins the NSA, then the NSA will finally have a superhuman with the potential to grow into a special rank. Someone who could become strong enough to stand up against Armageddon classes in the future, like King. James wanted Mark badly, but he also knew that it would not be good to make Mark an enemy this early. Mark was only going to get stronger in the future, and James decided that he would not antagonize Mark against the NSA and the Federal Republic of America, so that when he grows into his full power, he will not think about leaving America. Very well then, I will not prevent you from going to the island, but keep in mind that this mission is serious, and you must collaborate with everyone that shows up. If I am allowing you to go with us, then you must coordinate with the superhumans. They are all superhumans that have been in the field far longer than you have, and you will show the proper respect, understand? James was no longer joking like before, and his voice carried a gravity to it that Mark hadn't noticed before. Right now, James wasn't talking as the battle junkie that wanted Mark to join his organization no matter what. He is talking as the chairman of the NSA who wanted to make sure that this mission went well. Mark had no issue with respecting people as long as they respected themselves and him as well. As long as the other superhumans don't do anything that would make him want to beat the crap out of them, then they would be okay. I have my own ride, so you can keep your plans to yourself. I'm only going to that island for one reason, and once I have her, I will leave with my helicopter, so you don't need to worry about me. Your team can do whatever it wants. Just don't stand in my way, and we should be fine. Mark has only been a part of the superhumans world for about 3 hours, and he has already run into 4 people that he didn't like one bit. Fiona was always trying to get in his head, and he was going to give her one hell of a beating the next time she tries it. Tyler just wanted to fight him for the fun of it. Gray just pissed Mark off, and Mark knew that meeting that man again would end very badly for Gray. And then there was James here, who was just a freaking crazy old man that loved to punch before asking any questions. Mark thought that getting old was supposed to give you more sense, not less of it. It's only been 4 years since superhumans started getting blessings from the gods, but almost all the superhumans Mark has met have been crazy in one way or another. Are all superhumans crazy, or is it the pressure of the job that makes them start to behave like this? Mark didn't want to know the answer to his question, and he simply told James that he would find his own ride as he started walking out of the room. Pal was going to be bringing the helicopter soon, so Mark would use that to go to the island, and the rest of them could use their own means of transport. I'll call you Big Brother Mark from now on. Mark looked back with a raised brow as he heard the little Talia say this. Talia was standing right behind him, and she was looking up at him with intense focus as she hugged her teddy bear tight to her side. What the hell was she saying? Since when were they close enough for her to want to call him Big Brother? Well, it wasn't that Mark minded, but he just didn't think that she would make such a 360 after everything that he just said to her grandfather. He thought she would be angry at him. Talia couldn't be angry at Mark right at this moment, because she understood his position, and she knew that her grandfather could be a pain in the ass. Even though she was only 6 years old, Talia was very mature for her age, and she could tell that Mark didn't do anything wrong. She already had enough conscious understanding to know that her grandfather was in the wrong here. Mark obviously didn't want to fight her grandfather, but her grandfather didn't give him a choice and only started to go after him, forcing Mark to fight back. But even though it was something that Mark should be angry about, Mark was not retaliating, and he was being the bigger person and letting go of the situation like that. That showed a lot of maturity, and Talia could tell that Mark was a reliable person. And the fact that he was doing all of this just for the sake of his friend was even more amazing. I know my grandfather caused you a lot of issues, so I'll call you Big Brother from now on. Please don't be angry at my grandfather. He's an idiot, but he is not a bad man. He just doesn't know when to hold himself back, because he is afraid he will die if he stops moving. James shouted in indignation as he heard Talia say this. And Mark scoffed at the barbed insult from Talia, Was she always this quick-witted, or was it a result of her blessing? Even the way she spoke was nothing like a child. She was cute, and she had the appearance of a 6-year-old, but it was obvious that she had gone through a lot more than any other 6-year-old in the world. She was very mature for her age. Mark didn't say anything back, and he just reached out and pat the little girl on the head once more. This time she didn't fight against it as she huffed at his actions. She knew that she was too cute, so it was understandable that people would want to pet her. She would allow him to pet her this once, since she accepted him as her big brother.